Yes, for long-term tissue storage. It's the only tissue that stores energy long-term. Excess energy specifically.
I wouldn't say only. You could say primary, but.
Okay, I'm looking forward to knowing what the other one is. Maintenance calories may or may not result in weight maintenance, as the number itself equates to replacing total daily energy expenditure, which includes physical activity, thermogenesis, and the internal processes that occur afterwards, such as muscle protein synthesis. So, as I previously stated in this claim, this entire process may or may not result in weight maintenance. Do you agree? Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, there will be some variance to it, yeah. You're not going to be able to keep your weight the exact same all the time, if that's what you're getting at.
Well, let's say a long-term weight with a change between 3 and like 5%.
Well, if you're at weight maintenance, I would say, yeah, you would stay there if you're going to stick to that definition. Or if you're going to stick to maintenance, as pretty much everybody talks about it.
Okay, we'll get into that in a bit. And
Okay.
then final statement would be the addition of muscle tissue is not stimulated or more stimulated by a caloric surplus.
Well, it relates to the first point. I'd say context dependent.
All right, so let's get into each one. First statement, a caloric surplus is not necessary for optimal muscle growth.
Okay.
So go ahead with the context, because I know you said that there was context here.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's scenarios where it would be. I mean, there's a lot you could outline. I mean, an example I was using is like, say you have a guy who's 5'9", 150 pounds, right? You could say 15% body fat. I think in that case, it's pretty clear he'd benefit from it. I mean,
So
do you have parameters for what you would say is not necessary for it or not optimal?
So when I say optimal, I'm referring to a caloric surplus would equate to the same amount of muscle growth as maintenance, given XYZ context you want to give. So I can agree that maintenance and a surplus would result in the same amount of muscle growth at a healthy body fat percentage. Obviously, if you're talking about over or underweight individuals, that's not necessarily the context that we're referring to here. At least for my argument, is that a caloric surplus is not necessary for optimal muscle growth at a healthy body fat percentage, and that is
okay. This is good. We can start here. Okay. How do you define healthy body fat percentage? Because that's very open for interpretation, in my estimation.
So healthy body fat percentage, as defined by the literature, which would be it varies between genders. So I believe for men it's between 10 and roughly 18 to 20%. For women, it's a little higher, so around 15 to roughly 25%.
Okay.
But generally speaking, just to, I guess, put a little bit more specifics here, when I say healthy body fat percentage, I'm talking about wiggle room. So you're not on stage level lean. So you're not stepping on stage.
Well, I did step on stage before at like 10% or above, so I know what that's like. You're not going to win in that case. But okay, I mean, if you're talking, yeah, I mean, nobody realistically bodybuilding. There might be amateurs, but no one's going to be really I mean, maybe low teens. Some people can, but if we're talking like typical stage, you're thinking single-digit body fat for a man.
Okay, so like unhealthy levels of body fat where your hormones are being altered, you're not able to properly fuel your body, you don't feel good. Comfort. That's the main thing here, is that you're at a comfortable body fat where you're not over fat, you're not under fat.
How do you define comfortable?
Healthy. You're hormonally healthy. You're not near death.
Health is the opposite of healthy near death.
Okay, so hormonally healthy, as I said.
Sure.
Okay, so if you're hormonally healthy, you're healthy all around, there's no reason to be in a caloric surplus to build muscle optimally.
Okay, well, sure. I mean, like I said, say you have a guy that's 5'9", 150. He could be hormonally perfect. He could have high test levels, the whole thing.
Okay.
But he's 150 pounds.
Okay.
So what would you tell him to do?
Well, if he's not over fat or under fat, I would tell him to eat at maintenance, which would be replacing your total daily energy expenditure through dietary calories with adequate amount of protein and optimal, like hard, intense training.
Mhm.
There's no reason to not optimally build muscle.
You would agree he needs to gain weight, though, right?
Gaining weight and muscle would occur very slowly, but that I don't define weight like weight maintenance as maintenance calories. That's not. So as I said in the third statement of the claim, that is not the definition.
Well,
At
yeah.
least by
Can you reiterate your definition of maintenance, because you have a different one than pretty much all the established industry agrees upon.
Yeah, so according to Stevens et al. 2006 in a Nature journal, maintenance of body weight cannot be fully defined as, and I quote, any recommendation of bounds to define weight maintenance will be arbitrary to some degree, as you stated. Ultimately, this particular article defines what body weight maintenance in the context of obesity and general health as maintaining body weight within a 3 to 5% change, depending on the size of the person, smaller individuals leaning towards the 3% and larger towards the 5%. So contrary to like the understanding of weight maintenance being defined as calorie maintenance or maintenance calories, there's no diet that is specifically tied to this definition. It's just body weight maintenance.
Didn't you say it's not body weight maintenance, though?
Maintenance calories is not defined as weight maintenance. That's what this study is discussing, or this review specifically.
Okay, so from what I gather, you include any muscle that would be gained that's under somebody's maintenance, right? That's what you would say?
Well, additionally, according to Wolf et al. 2006, the resting energy expenditure of muscle includes muscle protein synthesis. So any gains that you are making with consuming maintenance calories or replacing your total daily energy expenditure, that is inclusive of muscle protein synthesis.
Okay. Well, the net result of muscle protein synthesis, though, you're going to be gaining mass, correct? Because, right, the
Yep.
end result is muscle, so you're gaining mass, right?
Yes, you're gaining weight. I never defined maintenance calories as maintenance of weight.
Okay, sure.
And it's never defined as that in general. A diet is not specifically tied to weight maintenance. In fact, you can actually exceed the definition of quote unquote body weight maintenance simply through altering glycogen in water.
Yeah,
For
sure.
example, there's another few studies here that discuss how glycogen storage and capacity and de novo lipogenesis, yada, yada, yada. Here, the actual studies, Murray and Rosenblum 2018 and Fernandez Elias et al. 2015. They look at the relationship between muscle water and glycogen after prolonged exercise. Each gram of glycogen is stored alongside 3 grams of water. Now, to give a practical example, I'm a relatively small individual. So compared to the average woman who is 170 pounds, according to the CDC, this would lean towards the changes of 3%, as I stated, according to the current literature, 3% change versus 5% change, depending on how big you are. So this would equate to approximately 3.84 pounds. Now, if I were to max out my glycogen stores in a caloric surplus, according to the prior studies I listed, that would equate to approximately 5.75 pounds. So I would be not maintaining my weight, according to the Stevens et al. Journal 2006, which defines body weight maintenance as being a change within 3 to 5%. Overall, we're discussing how body weight maintenance in general is extremely arbitrary and would not be tied to a specific diet.
Okay, well,
Physiologically.
so how do you define a deficit and surplus then? Because your maintenance definition kind of deviates from the norm. How do you define the other two?
So it doesn't actually deviate from the norm. If you're discussing any sort of obesity, sort of actual randomized control trial, Rasmussen et al. 2015, Krause et al. 2020, Redmond et al. 2013, all three of them define body weight maintenance within the context of obesity, and they don't account for muscle growth because there's no resistance training in the study, yet they still use total daily energy expenditure as the definition of what maintenance calories is. And using total daily energy expenditure, they define their caloric deficit to actually be able to lose the weight throughout the course of the study. So an energy deficit would be eating below total daily energy expenditure, and eating in a surplus would be eating above your total daily energy expenditure. And through that, you can quite literally gain muscle while losing fat, which we know is
Sure.
true through body recomp. So
Sure.
if your body weight like if your body weight itself was tied to maintenance calories, then this would not be able to occur, because why are you gaining muscle tissue, which is weight, but also losing tissue at the same time? Are you defining body fat maintenance and body just weight maintenance as a whole as the same thing?
Well, that's what the recomposition term is, right? You're like, so if you're at 150 and you're at maintenance and there's that small variance, right? You build the muscle, but it's essentially replaced in a pretty linear fashion with fat loss. That's like the point of it.
So physiologically, if one were to, let's say for a few weeks, work out, gain some muscle, lose some fat, they maintain their body weight as a whole, that would be defined as maintenance to you. But let's say they increase the amount of calories that they're eating, and now they are gaining fat a little bit. Well, actually, no. Here's a better example. Let's say person A is losing fat, gaining muscle. They're eating lower calories than their maintenance. They're two identical people. Person B is eating enough calories to maintain their body fat stores, but is gaining muscle. Person A is maintaining their body weight. Person B is gaining body weight. Are they both is one person in a caloric surplus and one in maintenance? What is going on there?
Well, person B would be in a surplus, yeah, if they're maintaining their fat and gaining muscle, right? What else
No.
would it be? What
Yeah,
else
they're
would
fat and
what,
gaining muscle.
yeah, what else would it be? If how is
So
it not
how
a
is
surplus?
person A gaining muscle but losing fat?
I mean, you just explained how it's possible. It's not impossible. I mean,
Okay,
you I
so
mean, what
first, so the
go ahead.
reason why I'm saying that is because if you're eating less than your total daily energy expenditure, your body will literally dip into your body fat stores
Sure.
via a process known as lipolysis.
Hmm.
So unless you're eating under your total daily energy expenditure, you're not going to be using body fat.
You think that it would never happen?
Well, give me an example where it does.
Well, I mean, for example, right, if you're keeping your weight roughly where it is and you're adding muscle tissue and the muscle protein synthesis takes energy for that process to occur as well as building the muscle, your body would take from some of the fat that you have, assuming that you're not adding any fat to it, right?
No,
What would be the case then?
you would be maintaining your body fat stores. You'd be slowly gaining muscle over time.
And your fat would stay the exact same?
I mean, over a long period of time, you would be increasing your fat relative to muscle, but in like the short term where you're talking about, then no, you wouldn't be. And honestly, if you continued that process, you would get really lean because you wouldn't be changing your body fat at all.
So you're saying your fat mass would stay exactly the same?
I mean, after a certain point, your maintenance will catch up. So here's another study here, and it looked, the Libel study. This one actually is very good. Libel et al. 1995. And it basically states that your maintenance calories will change in accordance with your body weight. Now, based off of the prior study, which includes the resting energy expenditure of muscle, well, it includes muscle protein synthesis and the resting energy expenditure of muscle and total daily energy expenditure by proxy. This pretty much states that as your body weight increases with muscle, which is a part of your total daily energy expenditure, and as defined by most obesity literature, replacing your total daily energy expenditure is what maintenance calories is, then as you gain that muscle mass, you are eating at maintenance because you're not changing your body fat stores, but your maintenance calories themselves are increasing because you're gaining weight.
All right, so if your maintenance is here and then it gets to here, what is this part in between?
I'm confused what you're talking about.
Well, you just said, right, you gain weight, your maintenance goes up with weight, right?
Yes.
It has to.
Your BMR specifically will increase as you gain body weight, and similarly your maintenance calories will also decrease as you lose body weight. If you're on a fixed
Right.
caloric deficit, you'll eventually hit a plateau.
Right.
Same thing with being on a fixed caloric surplus, you're going to eventually hit a plateau.
Right. So either, right, we're here either way. We could go down here We could go up here. In either case, there's a point that changes,
So I'd
right?
like to ask you, what exactly is that person A doing specifically, eating in a caloric, like, are they actually eating in a caloric surplus? What is different between a person who is maintaining their body fat stores and a person losing body fat stores?
The person losing body fat stores is oxidizing and using them, right?
How? Why?
Because it's been prompted to do so given whatever they're consuming. It needs to do that.
Yes, why are they prompted to do so? Why are they prompted to use their energy stores?
Because they're not meeting their energy demands.
And that is defined as?
I think a deficit, right?
Yes, so they would be in a caloric deficit. So if they are gaining muscle but losing fat, they're in a deficit.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, sure.
Okay, so if they're doing that and maintaining their body weight, you would have to define that as a deficit.
But you said they're maintaining their body weight.
Yes, but they're losing body fat. How are they losing body fat but they're maintaining their body weight? That makes no sense.
Well, sure it can. I mean, like I said, if your weight's staying in this one stable spot and you're
How?
building, hmm?
How?
What are your thoughts on you go by calories, right? You're a Kaiko person.
Yes, but that literally defines what I'm talking about. So when you're talking calories in, calories out, that's referring to total daily energy expenditure. Calories in, you're talking about the calories that you're consuming, the calories that you use from your body fat stores when you don't take in enough that you're actually consuming. Then on the off side of that, if you're eating over that, you're going to store it as body fat because that's what body fat is for. It's the physiological storage tissue.
Okay,
If
we'll
it's
talk about
not,
that.
then yeah. Oh,
Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll go to that in a second. Can you answer the question with the steps? Like, if you're here and then you get up to here, what do you do in between? What's this? Like,
when
step
it's
one.
plateau, you continue to increase it because as you gain body weight, your maintenance calories will increase accordingly. So, as Label et al. 1995 stated, maintenance calories changes in accordance to body weight because your BMR changes. So, you're carrying more body weight and you're moving around. If you're on a fixed deficit, you're going to eventually hit a plateau, and that's because you hit your maintenance. If you're 120 pounds, you eat a fixed deficit of 1,500 calories, you're going to eventually hit a weight where 1,500 calories is your new maintenance. But is that still a deficit? No, because you just hit your maintenance.
Well, I mean, in the scenario you're bringing up, you're in maintenance all the time.
No, you're not, because you're either gaining or losing body fat stores when you're in a surplus or deficit.
Okay, so like I mentioned, if your maintenance increases over time, even if you're adding only muscle mass, which is very, very difficult to do,
If
if
you're
you're only
only
adding
adding,
muscle.
yes, if you're only adding muscle over time, you're not replacing your body fat stores. If you're not replacing your body fat stores, that'll effectively put you in a deficit if you keep that going for a long-term period of time, because now you're decreasing your body fat. If that person who's not changing their body fat percentage just keeps gaining muscle, they're going to get really lean. So eventually you can define that as a deficit, even though they're quote unquote gaining weight.
Okay, this is why I asked about Kaiko, because the entire Kaiko thing goes down to energy and energy out determines, there's variance with water and like sodium and everything. Okay, sure. But basically muscle and fat. The entire premise is that, right, surplus energy, right, energy in has to surpass energy out. Then to cut, it's the opposite. And the maintenance is pretty much equal. So you said somebody could technically be gaining weight in a deficit, right?
Well, not necessarily gaining weight in a deficit, in the sense where if they maintain their maintenance for too long of a period of time, that maintenance is eventually going to become a deficit because they're not eating enough to replace their body fat stores.
Right, so it will become a deficit.
Eventually. That's long term. You're comparing over like years upon years of time.
I mean, it doesn't take years upon years. That could happen within a number of months even. It doesn't have to be terribly long term.
You think you can gain over 3 pounds of muscle naturally in 3 months if you're not a beginner?
I mean, if you're a total beginner, maybe that's probably it. Or maybe like new to a cycle or something.
I'm talking about like an just advanced lifter, because that's most of the population.
Advanced lifters are most of the population since we're,
Well, no, most of the natural bodybuilding population, if we're talking about that.
well, what percentage of lifters are natural bodybuilders? It's like less than 1%.
Well, all I'm saying is that if you are talking about people who are on gear or newbies to the gym, you're not talking about just like advanced lifters. We're talking about advanced lifters where no other variables are involved. Gear is another variable. Being a beginner is another variable. We can talk about what's going on with them in general because they're just gaining muscle more
Well,
fast.
why are we talking about advanced lifters? You understand most people who consume your and my content and overall fitness content are novices, right?
Yeah, so if they're gaining muscle at a faster rate, then they're putting themselves into a deficit at a faster rate.
Say that again.
If they are gaining muscle at a faster rate to the point where they're getting extremely lean, then yes, they are putting themselves into that quote unquote deficit at a faster rate because they're not replenishing their body fat stores.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, realistically, how long can that go on for while still making progress?
I don't understand why this is relevant to the conversation because that hasn't been measured, so we actually don't know. I mean, you can pretty much go until you're extremely lean, but there's going to be a point where there's no more energy that you actually can use.
Well, yeah, you said we started this. You said optimal muscle growth, right?
Yes, I said optimal muscle growth, except I'm defining maintenance as replacing your total daily energy expenditure, which would include the cost of growing muscle, which by proxy would replace your body fat stores, because if you just maintain the same amount over time, you would be using your body fat stores at a certain point. So you can't have a fixed number as your quote unquote maintenance calories. You have to increase it as you gain weight.
Right, which goes back to the steps. Do you remember? What do you call this part?
You're increasing your maintenance as your maintenance increases.
Right,
It's
which is a surplus, is it not?
No, it's still maintenance because your maintenance increases in accordance to your body weight, as label et al. 1995 states.
Okay, I mean, I haven't read the study you're referring to, but that's one thing. I mean, we're talking in general, like even if your maintenance can go up,
Yes.
obviously.
So as you lose weight, if you're in a
Mm-hmm.
deficit, as you lose weight, your BMR will go down. A
Mm-hmm.
1,500 calorie diet. Let's say you lose weight on a 1,500 calorie diet, you will eventually hit a point where you no longer lose weight, and that'll be your new maintenance. That's
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, and you have to keep doing a deficit to get to lower and lower maintenance
But
points.
is that deficit more and more? No, it's in accordance to your body weight, because as your body weight goes down, that's more and more of a deficit. When we're talking about muscle, it's not necessarily that you're not increasing past a surplus. A surplus is gaining body fat. That's what it is physiologically.
Okay, so you define a surplus as only fat gain.
No, it's eating more than your total daily energy expenditure. Muscle growth is a part of total daily energy expenditure.
All muscle growth forever. It all falls under that.
According to Wolf et al. 2006, the resting energy expenditure includes muscle protein synthesis.
Okay, I mean, sure. Okay, I mean, you've been tossing out a lot of studies here. Hold on, I have a few written here. Let me find one of these. Where is it? Oh, okay. I'm not as prepared as you had them pulled up. Oh, I apologize. Okay. Let's see. All right. Well, okay. This one here, this is from, where is it? Slater, Gary, John et al. This is from August 2019. They have a graph here. They go over skeletal muscle hypertrophy. They show de novo protein synthesis, and they talk about the process by which new muscle being added is mass being added, which you've agreed to. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. So if you're going to say that maintenance includes any muscle that is built, because the muscle being built is beyond one's current level, right? Because everybody does this for the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said a second ago, right? You were saying you have to do the deficit to reach lower and lower points of maintenance if you're going to get
No,
lean.
of body weight. So as you lower your calories, you're lowering it in accordance to what your new maintenance is. So if you're on a 1,500 calorie diet, you're 120 pounds, you lose weight, you're going to hit a point where that 1,500 calories is your new maintenance. Then you're going to have to lower it more, but is it a more significant maintenance, or is it just according to your new maintenance? And it is according to your new maintenance, because as you lose weight, your maintenance decreases.
Right. The decrease comes from a deficit, though. That's the entire point. Same with a weight increase comes from a surplus of some
So
form. Because you
then
have to,
why
You have to
Because
synthesize the muscle out of something.
you're not synthesizing it out of a quote unquote surplus because you don't store energy, and you don't store energy long term in muscle, meaning you don't use muscle tissue
Sure.
when you don't have enough energy physiologically. You use it pathologically if you're starving, but it's in the same way that you'll use cardiac tissue and extra things floating around in your bloodstream because you're starving. That's pathological. Physiologically, you only use fat tissue for energy when you are in a point of a deficit. That's why you can get lean but gain muscle at the same time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not debating that those two things are possible. Okay, so do you advocate so-called main gaining then?
You're just replacing your total daily energy expenditure. So yeah, you don't
So
do. So just out of curiosity, because we are talking about bulking and cutting, what purpose do you think gaining extra body fat has on your process of growing muscle? Like, why?
primarily it's going to come down to leverage, which is a big thing. Like I mentioned, if you're 5'9", 150 pounds, and if you somehow manage to gain only muscle mass, which is very wishful thinking, if you're at 150 pounds and you're just stuck there, you're like, what? I saw on your story yesterday or something. You said, I mean, what was your rate of gain for main gaining? You said like 1 pound every 8 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, so that's based on the Mangine. Oh man, I forgot the actual
It's fine.
date of this. Mangine. Oh yeah, Mangine et al. 2015. It's a study that looked at the effect of high volume versus high intensity training on muscle growth in advanced lifters, and it found that advanced lifters on average will gain around 8 ounces of pure muscle every 8 weeks. And I did these calculations myself using the cross sectional area. I converted it using average muscle volume amounts for specific muscles, and then I quantified each muscle that we realistically would train, and then I added it all up. I did a little bit of calculations using the approximation of 5 to 6 calories that would be used to synthesize a new gram of muscle protein. Obviously we don't actually have this energy expenditure, which actually the Slater study that you cited also would basically agree that we don't actually have that numerical value. Um anyways, all that being said, yeah, so the average advanced lifter would gain approximately 8 ounces of pure muscle mass, no body fat involved.
Right. The guy I mentioned was 5'9", 150. That's not an advanced lifter. That's a novice in almost any case, unless the guy's
That,
right off the stage or something.
I mean, like, it really depends on their training style and how well they've been training, but yeah, I guess. I don't think that example necessarily matters in the context of what I'm talking about.
Well, I
If you're
mean,
gaining muscle at a faster rate, you would have to increase at a faster rate.
yeah, sure. But like I was mentioning, okay, so if your weight is going up ever so slowly, that could impair your progress in the gym, right? You start plateauing on given exercises,
Well,
right? I
that's
mean,
why you would, so just to give you the practical recommendations that I give, it's you estimate your total daily energy expenditure with your non-exercise thermogenesis. So how active are you at work? How much do you fidget? And you would all account for this in like an online calculator. It's just giving you a good estimation.
I'd say there's a
After that,
pretty big margin of error, but okay.
well,
There's a big error
well,
margin
yeah,
with any of it.
that's why you test it out for a few weeks first, and you figure out what works for you. You don't just jump right into a diet and forget all things, everything to the wind. You have to let the diet kind of like work itself out. You play around with it a little bit. You make sure you're not gaining too much fat. You're not losing too much fat. Once you find that diet, you're good. Because as I said, body fat is the energy storage that we dip into, the energy storage that we provide to when we're eating too much. So it's dependent on how much or how little body fat you're gaining and losing. Now, my practical recommendation is first estimating your total daily energy expenditure. Then after that, you add in a pre-workout meal. This would replace how many calories that you would be burning theoretically during exercise and building muscle, because building muscle is a relatively inexpensive process.
So how much would the pre-workout meal be then? I mean, are we talking minuscule amounts of food? It seems like
Oh, it really depends. I mean, the real goal here is just to gain as little body fat as possible.
as little as possible. So you're not keeping your fat mass the same thing. You want to gain as little as possible.
You are pretty much keeping it the same. It's impossible to keep it exactly the same. I mean, I think we can both agree that you can't even control a bulk that well. Like you can't control exactly how much body fat you're gaining at a time. You can't control how little body fat you're losing at a time. In a similar way, if you're eating at a maintenance diet, you can't exactly maintain your body fat.
Right. Earlier you said maintenance, or I'm sorry, you said a surplus was any amount that resulted in fat gain, right?
Okay, so if you want to play semantics with this, then we can
Okay.
also play semantics with bulking that you
Hey, no,
can't be an exact.
I'm just asking what you said.
Well, that's literally what I'm saying is like you
I
can't
know.
be exact. It's not an exact science.
Right. So they will be in a surplus then.
They won't be in a surplus because they're not gaining a significant degree of body fat.
Well, we didn't say significant. We said any.
That's this. So what are you
That
exactly?
that's not the same thing.
So why would you need a bulking and cutting cycle? Because that's the whole argument here is that bulking and cutting specifically is not necessary.
Well, I mean, like you just said, you're going to gain some level of body fat, pretty much inevitable.
But you're not cutting it off because you don't need to. If you're gaining so little that you're just catching right up with your muscle mass, it doesn't matter. It's not an actual surplus. You're not bulking because I mean, if you want to say that it's a constant bulk, go right the hell ahead. But like, then you have to take away the cutting part. And then you have to redefine everything because the whole bulking cycle thing is typically, according to that one bodybuilding study, the Lenzi et al. 2021, the dietary strategies of modern bodybuilders during different phases of competitive cycle. The way they define bulking, they're eating way over the amount of calories they need, gaining way more body fat than they need, and they're also eating way more protein than they need. They're eating way little carbohydrates that they need, so they're probably not even fueling their bodies properly. And on top of that, most of them had eating disorders.
Well, yeah, that's bodybuilding. Wow. Okay, there's a lot we got to. Is that the study you put on your story saying that I cited that I didn't?
You were saying that there was like one study citing bulking. It really doesn't matter at this point. So
Okay, so right.
go.
Okay, so that's the one. No.
I mean, that's just one bodybuilding study. There's a few of them that discuss
Okay.
eating disorders in bodybuilding. So, I mean, if you want to go, I'm saying that bulking and cutting is not necessary for muscle growth because it's not.
Right. You just advocated very slowly bulking though, because you're going to gain some fat, which you said is, I mean, a bulk is a surplus, is it not fundamentally? Or do you think that's not the case?
Well, a bulk and a cut cycle, which is what we're talking about here, is gaining a significant amount of fat and then cutting it off.
How do we define significant then? What parameters define significant fat gain?
Well, how do you define it? Because you're the one who advocates for bulking and cutting.
Significant. I mean, that's up to the individual, really. I mean, some guys could get up to 20. They could get to the high end of the so-called healthy range that you mentioned. They could get up to 20%. They could be hormonally good. They could, like you said, comfortable, feel good. That's fine for them. I mean, the farther you push it, the more you're going to have to do the cleanup of the cut. But
is it necessary? Is it necessary to bulk that hard that you actually have to clean up?
depending on the goal, it could be. For general muscle building, probably not.
Why?
But again, there's going to be scenarios where some guys, they're going to have to gain body weight realistically to keep making progress. They'll plateau on so many things just over and over. And you can modify training and do X, Y, and Z, or you could eat more, and they'll just bust through the plateau over and over.
Why?
What do you
need to eat that much to? Why do they need to gain body fat?
Like I said, increased leverages are important on a number of exercises, right? Overall energy, someone could be at a so-called healthy body fat, and they could feel good and everything, but they still could be plateauing. I mean, at a certain point, like I said, you got a guy that's 5'9", 150 or something around there. You have to, right? Mass moves mass. You're going to have to gain size to progressively overload. Okay, you're smirking now. Okay, what's this going to be?
I'm glad that you said that, actually. So according to Tomlinson et al. 2016, people with more fat and mass tend to have stronger relative upper bodies, but weaker relative lower bodies compared to individuals with less fat. Now, considering that given equal weight and muscle, this would suggest that greater amounts of fat mass are primarily contributing to improved biomechanical advantages, but not necessarily increased muscle growth. So you can improve your biomechanical advantage and shorten the moment arm of a certain exercise, but are you going to grow more muscle because you shorten the moment arm and you're giving yourself a more favorable biomechanical advantage? No, you're not, because you're just improving the biomechanical advantage. For example, if you were to swing a weight around with really poor form, are you going to grow more muscle? No. Are you giving yourself a biomechanical advantage? Yeah.
I mean, that's apples and oranges. We're talking about
Well, you're
an
already,
exercise with consistent form. I mean, no one's saying to just swing weights around. That's not
well,
the same as gaining some weight to improve your
so
output.
what specifically does having added fat do to improve your muscle mass growth and not strength? Because as we just showed, increasing your fat mass likely gives you a biomechanical advantage because you have more fluff here. You're benching with less actual range of motion.
Sure,
So,
a bit.
hey, are you actually gaining more muscle, or are you just shortening your range of motion?
You could do both. I mean, if you're at 150 and you're benching, say you're benching body weight for 5 or something, you're stuck there, and you plateau, or you're like, maybe you're like little engine that could progressing, and then you say you over the course of a little bit of time you add 5 pounds, and you start hitting +5 week by week by week. I mean, progressive overload is necessary for muscle, right?
I mean, progressive overload is something that you experience. It's not something that you're necessarily forcing on your muscle. Progressive overload is an adaptation. So you're
Sure.
adapting to the movements that you're doing. Now, as I said, if you're doing a range of motion of 1 inch because you're so fat, obviously you're going to move a lot of weights. But are
Okay,
you?
okay, sure. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but okay.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much what they saw, was that people with more fat mass had stronger relative upper bodies, but weaker relative lower bodies. If fat mass actually correlated and improved your strength and improved your muscle growth, then they would have stronger relative lower bodies as well, not just upper bodies.
I would need to read this entire study because I mean we're just kind of picking little segments out without seeing the full thing. So I'd
Well,
want
no,
to see the entire study.
I'm using this study in comparison to what we're discussing, which
I mean,
is,
sure.
does fat actually improve strength? I mean, if you want to, just give me a mechanism by which fat mass or added fat mass will improve your strength, and not
I've said,
that's not necessarily an actual like physiological understanding.
oh, I mean, and I've said before. I mean, fat itself, I don't think mechanistically is going to really do anything, but that's not the only thing that accounts for it. I mean, that's reductionism to think the mechanism itself is just the end all be all.
But you just said that if somebody is stuck at a plateau, then if you gain fat, you're going to get out of the plateau.
It's likely,
How?
yeah.
Why? If fat mass doesn't confer
I
benefits,
just I just told you because you can mass moves mass, and you mentioned that study,
why?
which doesn't even disprove it doesn't disprove what I said. What do you mean why?
How does mass move mass if
Aren't
people
you a
who have more
scientist?
fat mass?
Aren't you a
Might
scientist?
might I interject? Mass does not move mass. Muscle mass moves mass.
Yes.
Adding fat mass does absolutely nothing in terms of force production. You
Nothing
cannot
at
argue
all.
that.
Nothing
You
at
can't
all.
argue that. You can't argue
Well, I
that.
like that you're picking her side, Mr. Moderator. Okay, sure, but
I'm just clarifying a point because you said mass moves mass. Muscle mass moves mass.
I,
What produces force? Muscles do.
I
sure.
mean, if you even argue the energy
All right.
exercise, well, specifically intense resistance training is primarily a glycolytic and phosphocreatine system based move, like actual activity. So it would, like, body fat in general wouldn't benefit at all.
I mean, sure. I mean, okay, we can even use the example like you mentioned. Okay, if we're gonna keep our fat mass insignificant, right? Like you were saying, we'll keep it insignificant, and we'll just keep adding muscle at our supposed maintenance the entire time. We're still adding some fat, right? Yes.
I mean, if you want to argue that, that's fine, but you're never going to have to cut. If you're going at such a slow pace that you're never having to cut, are you really going to call that a bulk and cut cycle? Or, I mean, you can call it just a bulk cycle, but then you have to start making videos on why cutting is not necessary.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you want to do I mean, the pace is going to be remarkably slow. I mean, we also come into the matter of time. I mean, how long do we want to realistically take?
Well, I mean, why does gaining fat mass increase the rate of muscle growth at that point?
At what point?
Well, what you're discussing, you're saying that it's going to be so slow. Isn't muscle growth slow?
Yeah, generally, yeah.
At all 2015 study, it took almost 8 weeks for 8 ounces of pure muscle growth, or for pure muscle growth specifically, quantified using an ultrasound. So
This is the advanced lifter one?
Mangine et al., yeah, 2015.
Okay. Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, yeah, I mean, of course, the more advanced you are, I mean, it's going to be even slower than it normally is.
I
But I mean, you can argue it's slow for everybody. I mean, we all wish we could get as big as hell easily, as fast as we wanted.
well, I mean, even if you want to talk about a slight or a large surplus, there's the Helms 2023 study, which found that a slight or large caloric surplus, which resulted in body fat gain, did not make any statistically significant differences in muscle growth when compared to a maintenance diet. In fact, if we discuss non-significant differences here, the slight and high surplus groups actually grew slightly less than the maintenance group in the anterior vastus lateralis and the rectus femoris muscle in muscle thickness measurements using an ultrasound. And then, in contrast, the maintenance group only appeared to experience non-significant subpar growth in the biceps measurements when compared to the surplus groups. So overall, if we're talking about like literal statistics of whether a caloric surplus and gaining fat is necessary, this study is pretty good evidence that gaining fat has literally no impact on the rate of which you grow muscle.
What study was that?
Helms et al. 2023.
Oh, the Eric Helms one, effective small and large energy surpluses, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then, so this can also be kind of like what is it? This can be supported by the Bray's study as well. Bray et al. 2012, which found that graded consumption of increased protein alongside a caloric surplus resulted in the same body fat gain and did not result in more and more continual muscle growth. And instead, the moderate and high protein groups actually experienced relatively similar gains in lean body mass, which would suggest that you require a training stimulus to grow muscle, as we know, and not a caloric surplus. And we can pretty much nix that out as something that is absolutely necessary for growing muscle at an optimal rate. Then, according to, what was it? There was another study that I found that was very recent. It was a 2024 study. Oh, yeah. Haramoto Yoichi et al. 2024. This one was a really interesting study, in my personal opinion, which was kind of interesting how they did their whole thing. They found that the effect of total body protein increases associated with a caloric surplus were likely due to the increase in fat mass, which would be also associated with an increase in secretion of adipokines, such as leptin, which are peptide hormones, which would increase total body protein. So overall, when we're talking about the body of evidence, a caloric surplus primarily results in increased fat gain, not muscle gain.
What amount of what surplus are we talking? How much?
We're talking about over your total daily energy expenditure, which would not include the processes of muscle growth. As I stated before, resting muscle energy expenditure will include the processes of muscle growth as it includes muscle protein synthesis.
Okay, so in your view, if someone goes from 150 to 180 and they gain a bunch of muscle and their fat pretty much doesn't move very much, they were maintenance the whole time.
If their relative body fat percentage isn't moving that much, yeah, they would be at maintenance, but that would take a long time. And just FYI, expecting to gain 20 pounds of lean mass is like a lifetime of training for a natural. Like, that does not sound
20 pounds. You think 20 pounds is a lifetime goal
for pure muscle as a natural?
I'm asking you.
You're saying that, okay, as a natural lifter, you're saying that it is possible to grow 20 pounds of pure muscle, no fat involved?
No, I did not say that at all.
That's what you just said to me.
No, it's not. You mentioned 20 pounds lifetime lean mass.
Yes, lean mass only. We're not talking about fat. So
right. Do you think that's like remarkable for a natural to do 20 pounds of lean mass in a lifetime?
Yes, that's very remarkable. 20 pounds of lean mass on your entire body is a lot of weight.
Oh, I know, but only 20. I mean, I could reference Lyle McDonald's model. His is way higher than just 20. I mean, he estimates 20 in a year, which I don't agree with. I think that's very, very generous.
Of pure muscle mass.
Muscle mass, yeah.
So do you have anything to demonstrate that individuals can gain over 20 pounds in a short period of time of muscle mass?
Well, we're not talking talking short period. I don't even, like I said, I don't even agree with him, but we're not, you said lifetime. That's not a short time frame.
Well, a lot of people are probably not training for their entire life. They're training for maybe early 20s to most people stop training when they're really, really old. So give that like 10, 15 years before people start leaving the gym.
Okay. Do you want to say 10 years as just an example?
I mean, sure.
Okay. I mean, do you think over the span of 10 years, 20 pounds of pure muscle mass that's a cap? You think that's like remarkable to do?
Well, if you have evidence that people can gain over 20 pounds of pure, and I'm saying like MRI scans of like people gaining that much muscle mass, like you can't gain, it is very, you need really good genetics for that. I could see somebody with really peak genetics, maybe,
Well,
yeah, but that's a lot.
do you have evidence of people not doing that?
Yeah, so the Mangini et al. 2015 study, they only gained about 8 ounces of muscle mass in 8 weeks. Pure.
Sure, 8 weeks.
You do the estimations, and I can send you all of my calculations for that.
Yeah, we're talking 8. We just mentioned 10 years, and now we're condensing down to 8 weeks.
Well, that's because most resistance training studies are 8 weeks. I mean, if you can find a study that's...
Well, I mean, yeah, that's one of the reasons these studies are limited to begin with. I mean, you can't hold these people in forever. You have to make you have to jump to a lot of conclusions with what you're going to interpret from these. That's part of it.
I feel like we're going a little bit off track here. So just in general, if we're talking about lean body mass, it doesn't really matter what our estimations are, because honestly, it's all going to be, what is the term? It's negligible, because we're never going to be able to track it. We're not tracking people over the course of 10, 20 years, how much muscle mass they gained, and we're doing MRI. That's just not realistic, and we're not putting people in metabolic wards for that. So
Yeah, sure.
Moving past that point, because it's not really contextually relevant, why would gaining body fat, as I stated before, of all of the evidence that I've cited, have any improve in the rate of muscle growth?
Like I said, leverage improvement's the main thing. But really the biggest thing is that the fat gain is a byproduct of gaining muscle overall, because I think you agreed to this even earlier. Tracking your precise maintenance or main gaining point that's not feasible to do. There's going to be some error margin. There's going to be some variance, right?
So just to clarify, did you just say that gaining body fat is a byproduct of gaining muscle?
No, that's not what I said. I said the process of building muscle and eating enough to accommodate that, if you want to call it main gaining, there's going to be some fat gain that happens with that, because you cannot eat at your precise maintenance all the time. Okay,
yeah, sure. So that's relatively understandable. However, are you going to be gaining a significant amount of body fat to the point where you're going to need a cut? Are you saying that that's necessary?
No, not at all. I mean, I can give you an example of you can see this on my account page, my Instagram. I was bulking, when did I start? August or September 2024, up until just when the new year started. I've gained like 6 total pounds.
That's a lot of weight.
6 pounds, and that's like a pound a month ish.
That's quite a bit of weight.
So do you think it's been disproportionately fat?
I mean, I can't tell you, because I don't know what your body composition looks like.
You can go on my page right now. I don't know if you can move out of the tab or whatever, but I don't know if you can. But
no, you can't.
Okay.
So either which ways. So do you really think that you have to gain a certain amount of body fat to get to the point where you need to cut? Because we're talking about bulking and cutting cycles.
No, not to the point that you would need to cut. No, I mean, listen, I talk to guys every day that they bulk too hard. It's very common. I've never said that's not common. It's very common. Happens all the time. They will bulk too quickly, and they'll gain disproportionate. I mean, the one, I forget the one exact study, but I mean, they put people on, I think it was even the Helms one, and they put them on, like, they call it the high surplus group, and it was way over whatever given amount. And it's like, oh, they gain more fat mass than fat-free mass. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not surprising.
Okay.
Of course that's going to happen.
So why is gaining fat necessary to also put on muscle?
Like I told you, it's inevitably going to happen to some degree.
How come people can lose body fat and gain muscle optimally and do it very well and be perfectly fine?
That's not the the same topic. That's not the same
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it is. If building muscle, if gaining body fat is a byproduct of gaining muscle, then how can people do literally the opposite, where they're losing body fat and gaining muscle?
No, you're missing. It's you don't just gain fat because you gain muscle. I'm saying in order to eat enough to facilitate continual maintenance increases over time, you're going to gain some body fat with that. Because if you're going to somehow precisely, I mean, what did you say? Was it's like 7 or 8 calories for muscle protein synthesis
Well,
or
I mean, you would also
whatever?
be including the amount of calories that you're expending for exercise in like that quote unquote energy activity expenditure, and then you're also adding in the muscle protein synthesis, and it would be approximately 20 calories a day. But that does vary depending on how much muscle you have. It depends
Well, yeah,
on your
sure.
genetics.
How realistic is someone able to track 20 extra a day?
Oh, we're not talking about realistic. We're talking about just maintaining your body composition. Like that's literally what I'm arguing is if you're eating
Well,
so low,
what good is this if it's not realistic? I mean, people aren't just equations on a piece of paper.
you can maintain your body composition yearly and not have to gain a significant amount of body fat to the point
Sure.
where you have to cut. Like that's the whole argument here, that you don't need to gain a significant amount of body fat and bulk just to cut. Like that's not necessary. And gaining body fat in general is not necessary to gain muscle. So just to go back to this point, because you skipped over it, you can lose body fat and gain muscle
Mm-hmm.
very efficiently. So if gaining body fat is a byproduct of gaining muscle, that shouldn't be happening.
Again, I don't. You can lose fat while building muscle. It's not going to be optimal depending on the
How do
situation.
you know?
What do you mean? How do I know?
How do you know? I mean, if you're in such a slight deficit that you're maintaining the same body weight, as I said before, like let's say somebody is in such a small deficit, they lose so little body fat over time that you barely notice it until you compare a picture from a year ago to the picture that they're now in currently. If they lose body fat at that slow rate, but they gain muscle, which is, by the way, metabolically active and it increases their maintenance calories,
Mm-hmm.
then how is that happening? Like, how are they gaining muscle at the quote unquote optimal rate, feeling amazing with good hormones while losing body fat? That shouldn't happen if gaining muscle, like, if gaining body fat is a byproduct of gaining muscle.
I mean, once again, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here, but I mean, you can lose fat while building muscle to a point. I mean, if you started, let's take the low end of your healthy range. Let's say somebody's 12% body fat, novice lifter, just started a few months ago, 12% body fat, 150-ish pounds. Okay, is he going to be able to optimally build muscle all the time, forever, if he stays roughly at that same point?
I mean, you can argue the same with literally any other diet or any fixed amount. Like, if you're talking about a fixed calorie diet, yeah, as I said, your maintenance will decrease and increase with the amount of weight that you're gaining. So you have to adjust accordingly over time. Like, as you get, like, at least with my practical recommendations that I give, it's as you gain muscle and as you gain tissue, you're going to get hungrier because muscle mass is metabolically active. So then you have to increase in accordance to maintenance, which is
Mm-hmm.
in accordance to maintenance, not in a surplus.
How
If
do
you're
how do
you're not.
you have to increase to get to higher and higher maintenance points, do you not? How else do you get there?
So if you eat more than your total daily energy expenditure,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to increase body fat because that's this energy storage tissue.
So any amount over maintenance results in body fat, right?
Over total daily energy expenditure results in body fat. Yeah.
Okay, but you also advocate to slowly, like you said, we're going to gain really slowly body fat as we build a lot of muscle, right? Very slowly.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you're gaining relative to the amount of relative to the amount of muscle mass that you have,
Mm-hmm.
really just replacing your body fat store. So
But,
you have a relative amount of body fat as you did before.
right, so, but you still have to gain fat mass with the muscle mass in some form, right? To keep the numbers linear.
So as I just said, it's relative to the amount of muscle that you have. So let's say you have X pounds of muscle and X pounds of fat.
Mm-hmm.
increase the amount of muscle, now you need to increase the amount of fat to match that relative amount. That's the same body composition. You are still at maintenance.
But we did gain fat, right? Like
And you're not
you just said we gained fat.
You're going into the semantics here.
No,
It's
no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Your entire thing is semantics, because you're saying any amount is maintenance over time, even if it keeps going up and up and up. But anything resulting in fat gain is above maintenance. And then you just acknowledge, yes, you're going to gain some fat, even if you keep the proportion the same with the muscle. And then you said, oh, well, no.
Well, eating at maintenance calories is replacing your total daily energy expenditure, which includes the processes of growing muscle. So as you grow muscle, you need to increase the amount of body fat that you have relative to that muscle in order to maintain your fat stores.
Right. So you have to gain fat just to keep the percentage where it is, right?
But that's still maintenance because you're maintaining at total daily energy expenditure.
How though? How do you maintain? How do you do that?
You're replacing your total daily energy expenditure. As I said, as you increase your body weight, whether it's muscle, whether it's fat, whether it's anything, your maintenance calories themselves will increase along with it.
Well, yeah. What do you call that?
Your maintenance calories, because it's increasing.
But how does it go up? Because maintenance by default implies that you're kind of doing this, right?
So muscle growth is a signaling dependent process, as I've stated multiple times.
Energy dependent too, or just signal?
It has an energy requirement, a very minimal energy requirement, which is
good.
You can lose body fat and gain muscle, and maintain the same body weight. So,
sure, but if you keep using stored fat, your body weight's not going to keep going up, and you're going to lose body fat percentage.
Okay, so by the way that you define maintenance, which is maintaining body weight, correct?
I would say largely, yeah. That's how thermodynamically everybody interprets it.
What is the difference between a sedentary individual who is not gaining or losing body fat, gaining or losing muscle, they're just sedentary, they're maintaining their body weight, and a person who is gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, but training? What is the difference between the two people?
The person training is going to be increasing their muscle mass. The other person wouldn't be, right?
No, diet-wise. Which one is on a maintenance diet?
They both could be on a maintenance diet. We don't know that, just given that.
How is the person losing body fat and gaining muscle if they are on a maintenance diet? If they are replacing their total daily energy expenditure, which includes the processes of muscle growth, how are they losing body fat?
They're using the body fat stores.
Why?
While their weight, right, while their overall energy balance, if you want to say, stays the same. Muscles built, you subtract from the fat. That's what is fueling the process.
Why? Why is that process stimulated if they are eating at maintenance?
Because they're training and prompting the response in their body. What do you mean, why is that happening?
Why does somebody lose body fat? What is the specific diet necessary to lose body fat?
Keto, no. So you're talking about specific intake and expenditure, right?
Yes.
Yeah, a deficit.
Okay.
Right? That's what you were saying?
Their body weight, if they are not eating at quote unquote maintenance according to your definition, but losing body fat and gaining muscle. You just said that they're eating at a deficit, but they're maintaining their body weight. So how is that a maintenance diet? You just said that it was a deficit.
No, you asked what is the deficit in order to be losing fat. Now, what I'm referring to, the general recomp, is you're basically swapping them out because as you're building muscle, you're losing fat and the percentage goes down. That's what it is.
You just said that it was a deficit, that they were eating in a deficit. Like, how do you stimulate them growing muscle and losing body fat at the same time when compared to somebody who's sedentary, maintaining muscle and fat, like they're not.
Okay, so this goes back to what you were saying earlier. So someone can.
Let's not dodge the point.
No, I'm not dodging. Because I remember what you said. So in your view, somebody can be in a deficit but gain weight overall because the muscle's coming on, right?
As I said, if you replace your total daily energy expenditure, you can gain muscle. Muscle is the muscle growth processes are a part of total daily energy expenditure. Now let's go back to the other part where you didn't answer me when I asked you, what is the diet that they're eating if they are losing body fat and gaining muscle? And compare that to the person who is not changing neither and eating at quote unquote maintenance calories because they are replacing their total daily energy expenditure.
You're going to say that the person is in a deficit then, right?
Yeah, they would have to be according to my.
Okay. What did you say before that? You said, what was it? You were saying that for, can you repeat? Do you remember what you said just before this?
Just
I know. It's a lot of words right now.
The processes that are involved in muscle growth are a part of your total daily energy expenditure, because resting energy expenditure of muscle includes muscle protein synthesis, according to Wolf et al. 2006.
Okay. So muscles accounted for in the TDEE,
yes,
right? So TDEE, that assumes that you're meeting your TDEE. Like you're not in a deficit. That means you're not in a deficit then, or is that possible?
So if you are replacing your total daily energy expenditure, which is what TDEE is, then you are at maintenance. That is the definition by the literature, in obesity literature, which doesn't even discuss resistance training, but talks about maintenance calories in the context of total daily energy expenditure. It is the definition of total daily energy expenditure in Label et al. 1995, a pretty darn old study. It's talked about in Rasmussen et where's the three studies that I had here? Rasmussen et al. 2015, Krauss et al. 2020, et al. 2013. So when we're talking about the majority of the literature, that is what maintenance is defined as.
So that disagrees with the general energy balance equation then?
No, it doesn't. So the energy balance equation is calories in, which is the calories that you're consuming. Are we in agreement there?
Sure.
Okay, and then the calories out part, calories expended exercise activity thermogenesis, the resting energy of all tissues, including muscle, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is you fidgeting and moving around, and then also thermic effect of food, which is the amount of calories that you burn eating food. Now, for example, your TDEE is very variable. It can increase and decrease, which is why it's semantic to say that you're going to be at total maintenance or total specific surplus, you're going to be at a specific deficit. But in general, what I advocate for is that you're just gaining muscle at a very slow rate and your body composition has little to no change. That is all I'm advocating for, and that the bulking and cutting cycle is not necessary.
Okay, so that's a double prong. So you believe bulking and cutting are both not necessary then?
The bulking and cutting cycle, as defined by just people online and as defined in the literature.
Well, hey, I thought we were doing the literature, so you can't just say people online, right?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, you can talk about the bulking and cutting cycle as defined by Lindsay et al. 2021. So bulking, which would be gaining a significant amount of body fat to a degree that you need to cut.
Okay.
And that's
okay, go ahead.
Well, that's just bulking and cutting. I mean, if you want to argue that all you need to do is bulk, then you have to make another video that's discussing what exactly that new bulk is, because most people, they correlate bulking and cutting together.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talk about something called the dirty bulk fallacy, which, I mean, there's plenty of examples in real life, but it's the assumption automatically that bulking means just, okay, Wendy's, stuff your face, eat everything in sight, pack on size as rapidly as possible, which that's not what, I mean, bulking colloquially means a surplus. That's really what it means. There's this one here. This is from Alex Leaf, Jose Antonio, 2017. Okay, they use bulking as a quote. This is the one I was referring to. They say intentional overfeeding or eating more calories than required to maintain body weight is a common practice among athletes, especially bodybuilders looking to increase their skeletal muscle mass. When combined with resistance training aimed at promoting skeletal muscle hypertrophy, a controlled phase of overfeeding is often referred to as bulking. Usually, the goal of bulking is to maximize gains in skeletal muscle mass while minimizing gains in fat mass.
All right, so I just pulled up the study now. So at the actual summary of your study and everything that you're discussing, In summary, overfeeding healthy sedentary adults with a diet moderately high in both carbohydrates and fat and low protein primarily results in fat mass. Although there is variation among studies, likely owed to differences among different study populations and foods with overfeeding, fat mass represents 60 to 70% of the increase in body fat, in body weight increase. And then if we look at the other study that I referred to, the Braze et al. Study, as I've acknowledged, protein is a signaling factor in muscle growth. However, the increase in lean body mass that occurs in congruence to an increased amount of adequate protein intake, it has a plateau. So whether you're eating a moderate or a high protein intake in addition to a surplus, you're going to increase the lean body mass to an extent, but then that's going to plateau. And likely you're going to reach that plateau if you also train. So if we're talking about eating in a caloric surplus, it is not necessary to grow muscle. And we know this based off of the other literature that I've already cited.
Well, right, it's not necessary, but optimal is the question, depending. So
Yep.
you don't accept this paper, the Leaf one, you don't accept their definition of bulking? Like, you disagree with it?
That bulking is gaining body fat?
It is the intentional overfeeding or eating more calories than required to maintain body weight. And the goal being promoting skeletal muscle hypertrophy, maximizing muscle gains, minimizing fat gains.
So just because you are increasing muscle gains doesn't necessarily mean that you're maximizing. You can maximize growth on a surplus. Yes, you can. You also won't maximize it if you're not training properly, because training and protein are the two primary stimuli.
Well, I mean, I think we can assume people are training, right? So, I mean, yeah, we're not talking about sedentary people.
Yeah, well, if a surplus was a way to quote unquote maximize muscle growth, then you would expect people who are sedentary to continually grow muscle in congruence to the increasing amount of calories. But we know that that doesn't exist because obesity does.
There's nothing to do with it, obesity existing.
Okay, so how does a caloric surplus independently improve or increase the rate of muscle growth?
Well, I mean, if you just want to talk people who are obese, I mean, they will gain muscle tissue simply from being fat.
So going back to my question, how does a surplus specifically increase the rate of muscle growth independently of training and protein?
I told you it doesn't, but that's not the only thing that matters.
Well, in the context of eating in a surplus, yes, it does.
Why would that be the only thing that matters?
Well, how does a surplus actually improve the rate of growth? If you can grow muscle in a deficit, you can grow muscle at maintenance, and you can grow muscle in a surplus, then what is the difference between maintenance and a surplus? A surplus. So why is the surplus better?
I mentioned earlier, because for given people, they're going to benefit largely from seeing some level of increase in their body weight over time. I mean, you mentioned earlier, you're going to have to gain weight and some fat, which is a surplus.
So if you're eating at maintenance, you're replacing your total daily energy expenditure. You're eating enough to sustain your body. You're not eating more than what your body needs. If you're eating in a surplus, you're eating more than what your body needs, and it's being stored as body fat, physiological storage tissue. Why is the surplus better, specifically?
Well, I mentioned the training, and you said you didn't accept that, or you don't want to talk about that.
No, because training can be done at maintenance.
What's up, dude?
So we're basically going in circles here. I want you to answer her question of why is a surplus where you're gaining mostly only fat, why is that more stimulating for muscle hypertrophy than being at maintenance or even in a deficit when we can match the levels of muscle hypertrophy or muscle protein synthesis? Why is a surplus more beneficial to hypertrophy in your own terms? Don't use any studies, don't use Google, just your own terms. We're going in circles around this.
Yeah. Like I said, it's beneficial because, one, leverages are going to be impacted. And you can say, okay, you're cutting the range of motion. Unless you're gaining remarkable amounts of fat, that's not going to be very significant. That's the main thing. You're going to increase your body weight. That is going to allow for much more consistent progressive overload. This is seen in general gyms, high school, athletic programs, college football. I mean, whatever sports you want to use, there's a reason they make them eat more. I'm just talking about the linemen get big and fat. I'm talking in general. They have the athletes grow because you need to grow. I mean, this is what this entire thing comes back to. You keep saying I'm trying to do this semantics, but you're advocating a surplus of some form. Then you say you don't advocate a surplus. You say that there's not a point to do one. That's the entire thing.
No, I'm saying that bulking and cutting specifically is not necessary to optimize muscle growth. That is all I'm saying. And that's what I've been saying. That was my very first video. That bulking and cutting is not necessary to optimize muscle growth if you're at a healthy body fat percentage. I have it memorized because I literally use the clip so
Oh,
many
I'm
times.
sure. I've heard it plenty myself too. But then you said 100 to 200 over maintenance, and I
So
was like, well, that doesn't
that was
work.
really me oversimplifying it. And honestly, I was about to make a video in a few days discussing on why that statement specifically is incorrect. Because you're just replacing the amount of calories that you're burning in exercise and growing muscle. Now, just to quickly brief on your point on leverages, relative leverage or improving your relative leverage, even if it's just by a little bit because you gained a few extra centimeters on your arm, can decrease, what is it, the like joint angles and the amount that you actually can go. So let's say you gain a little bit of thickness on your arm. Now you're not going to be able to go as far, or you're not going to feel like you're going as far. So you're going to press up a little bit sooner. So for example, let's say I'm doing a bench press. I go down here quickly,
Mm-hmm.
have really skinny
Mm-hmm.
arms, but then that I only go down here. Now I'm decreasing the actual range of motion that I'm lifting. So yeah, I would be decreasing the range of motion, even if I'm not gaining so much fat that I'm touching my bar, like touching the bar with my belly.
Well, the example you gave there, that'd be a significant amount of weight gain for that difference. But even so, I mean, you could not only the leverage, like I said, right? Okay, you're going to get bigger. That allows you to move more weight. A lot of people are going to say that they can train harder. They're going to have better workouts when they're eating more. I mean, like I said, I mean, the whole thing, because you mentioned the health, your whole thing revolves around this healthy body fat. 10 to 20, let's say the example of dudes, 10 to 20%, there's a lot of variance between those 2 points. I mean, someone who's closer to 10%, that's not even comparable to someone closer to 20%. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, so that's why I recommend maintaining a body fat percentage that you're comfortable with. I don't recommend maintaining or trying to quote unquote main gain when you're extremely lean and really uncomfortable. That's not the point of what I'm talking about. It's all specific to the person, obviously. That's why we have clients, is because people come to us wanting very specific advice. But that being said, does that change the general scheme of what my advice is? Not necessarily. I'm just applying it in different individual scenarios. Now, another argument that you could say would be that according to that Lindsay et al. 2021 study on the bodybuilders, what was found that the bodybuilders who were eating in a bulk actually underconsumed carbohydrates and they overconsumed protein. And because because approximately 24 to 40% of your glycogen stores are used during resistance training exercise, even though the phosphocreatine is preferred, you do require a level of carbohydrates for resistance training, for optimal resistance training. So individuals who are on subpar bulking diets where they aren't consuming enough carbohydrates, then they increase the calories more with more carbohydrates. Oh yeah, of course they're going to feel better because they're increasing carbohydrates that they need to increase the calories too.
How did they define insufficient carbohydrates?
Oh yeah, so according to the recommendations that are that were listed in the study, and I'm just going to quickly copy and paste here because I don't have the entire study memorized.
It's fine. Because, I mean, you don't have to eat any carbohydrates.
You don't have to, but is it better for performance because you're using 24 to 40% of glycogen? Yeah, it would be.
Well, I mean, if you're adapted to not eating carbs, your body will make all the glycogen you need. Gluconeogenesis will do it.
It can, but is it optimal?
If you're totally adapted, sure, maybe. That's going to depend on the person.
So is it optimal? That's what I'm asking. Like,
I don't know how you could say that for sure. That's subjective.
yeah, so somebody who isn't necessarily adapted to it, and let's see over here. Somebody who isn't necessarily adapted to it, they might be like, oh yeah, I'm not making any progress. I'm eating like slightly lower carbs than I should be. Then they increase the amount of calories that they're eating. Carbs, yeah, they're going to feel better because they're not necessarily adapted to that low carb diet. And also,
what do you call that increase in food from carbohydrates? What do you call that?
oh, you can take the calories from other macronutrients. Like you're not just consuming a fixed amount of protein and fat. You can say that you're eating let's say 20 grams of extra carbohydrates, but eat the same amount of calories as you did last week by taking calories away from fat or protein.
Sure.
So
So your argument there is that they would see superior performance because they just increase the carbs and remove the rest from something else?
yeah.
I mean, sure, yeah. Most people are not fat adapted, so yeah, they would do better with that.
And
I don't know what that has to do with.
well, that's the
I don't know how we ended up here, but
well, because you're saying that people who have increased calories, and by the way, we're using anecdotes here, people who increase calories experience improved performance. Are you sure it's from the actual increase in the calories, or is it just the increase in carbohydrates? Because even in that bodybuilder study with literal bodybuilders, they didn't eat enough carbohydrates to meet the recommendations for athletes.
does the study break? Like, do we see these bodybuilders? Like, what level are they? Like, do we know all the kind of factors about them? Because I mean, there's a lot of potential open windows here. Like, are they on gear? Are they natural? Are they self-identified natural? How experienced? What division? How much? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of
Experienced male physique competitors took part in the study. 2 participate athletes were between 19 and 40 years old and had actively competing bodybuilding championships in men's physique categories.
what federation did they tell you?
I don't believe I don't think that's actually allowed, because that would cross some ethical issues, because you're not allowed to discuss the identities of your
Yeah, well, I mean, did they even identify as anything? I guess not. They don't say like there's.
So you're not allowed to do that in studies. If you do that, that's not allowed. However, it should be mentioned that these studies are peer reviewed, so they do have access to the data when they are getting reviewed.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, okay, I mean, yeah, sure. So you could adjust. I mean, you mentioned a second ago. Okay, so does the benefit come from what did you say it was? It was increasing. You think the benefit would come from increasing carbs more than a surplus itself?
Yeah, because most people are going to add in either carbs or fats when they go into a surplus. I mean, unless you know people who drastically increase the amount of chicken breast they're eating in a bulk. I mean, by all means, go for it, but most likely they would be increasing the amount of fried chicken, not just baked chicken. That sounds very boring.
Well, that's a complete hypothetical. That I mean, I don't think most people lifting weights seriously and watching this content are eating fried chicken regularly.
All of this is a complete hypothetical, because we're talking about people who are typically, like, as you stated, people who are going in like years and they're needing quote unquote bulk. Most of them are still growing kids. Most of them might even be underweight. So if they're increasing the amount of calories that they're eating to gain enough healthy body fat, yeah, that's what I advocate for, which is bulking if you're underweight. So
well, what determines underweight then?
Hormonal profile, body fat percentage, stuff like that.
None of that has anything to do with weight directly.
It partially does. So if you're at very lean body fat, so for example, a competitor who just stepped off stage, I would argue that that is technically, in a sense, under fat. So you are.
I mean, I agree. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody would advocate somebody off the stage who doesn't have a show in the near future to not eat more. I mean, they're going to do that, but their hunger hormones are a mess anyway. They're going to do that by default.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, what percentage of people watching this are single-digit body fat? What percentage of lifters in gyms are single-digit body fat?
Okay. So if you're at 15% body fat, you're a male who's, as you said, 150 pounds. Why do they need to gain body fat to grow muscle optimally? What is the reason for it?
Because you mentioned earlier that there's going to be some body fat gain that is going to happen inevitably while you're building muscle mass, right?
Okay, but you're not gaining body fat to such a significant degree that you need to cut. So you're not doing
But
cycle.
I mean, okay, sure. I mean, listen, yeah. I mean, I don't advocate gaining. I mean, significant still is vague, but you're right. You're saying bulking and cutting, so you can't just remove one of those. You're talking about both of those things.
So I specifically stated in pretty much every video, bulking and cutting. It's a bulking and cutting cycle. People don't just say, "Oh yeah, I'm going on a bulk and it's gonna be forever." It's the everlasting bulk. Most people are not doing
The
that.
guy in Greece does, but yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're underweight and you literally lie about what you're eating,
Well,
I mean, I'm just.
So okay, so bulking and cutting then. So you think bulking is necessary then to some very small extent then.
No, I'm not, because I'm not arguing that you need to gain a significant degree of body fat.
So you believe bulking innately means significant degree of body fat.
You're eating over your total daily energy expenditure. If you are eating over your total daily energy expenditure, you're gaining body fat.
But is it significant? Is it guaranteed to be significant?
If you're just maintaining, so actually, as that other article states, it was a review article discussing what body weight maintenance actually means.
Can you just answer that really quickly? Like, do you believe innately eating a surplus means significant fat gain every time?
I am. Don't worry, I am.
No, I mean,
so
it's a yes or no. It's a yes or no.
So in that one review article, it's discussing how body weight maintenance is defined as a change between 3 and 5%. If 1 week you're 3%, 1 week you're 4%, another week you're 3% again, are you at maintenance? By that article, yes, you are.
Okay, I mean, sure, by that article, that's fine. I asked you a yes or no question. You don't need a study to sit there and think about it. It's yes or no.
No, it's a review article, so we're talking about the consensus made.
I asked you, it's a yes. You don't need it. There could be no science that ever existed.
Hold up, pause. She is providing science for her answer. She gave you an answer.
Dude, bro.
No.
Okay.
Pause.
Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
Okay. She gave you a response. She used science to back it up. That's it. You're getting mad that she pulled up an article to support her opinion.
No, I asked you don't need any studies.
You do need studies.
No, you don't. Not to answer that.
Yes.
So I should address this again.
Yes, you do.
Why? Why do you need a study to answer it? It's a very simple question.
Sure.
So in this scenario, any surplus means significant, whatever that means, fat gain all the time, right?
No, it does not. So if you are eating
so you just said no. Good. Gotcha. Good. You said no.
So can I just speak for a minute?
No, you can't, because this he's jumping in on your side now.
I'm not jumping in. I'm just saying she explained her point. She gave you an answer, and now you're getting mad.
No, I'm not mad. She just answered what I.
Okay. You seem pretty mad.
Specifically,
that's how I talk, bro.
Specifically, as I said, it's not an exact science. You are going to increase. It's
not an exact science. Interesting.
But if you need an
average, can we cut the childish crap from your end, please?
Hey, man, I'm
No. I'm gonna hold you accountable. Cut the childish crap.
Can I speak for a minute, please?
Yeah, go.
So, if you are gaining, let's say you go from 3% body fat to 4% body fat to 3% body fat to 4% body fat. Are you maintaining your body fat percentage?
No.
Are you?
Wait, what was that after you said on average?
If you're going to 3%, 4%, 3%, maybe 2%, you're going to 3% again. Are you maintaining your body fat percentage?
No, it's changing.
How?
If just gave different. What do you mean different percentages? How is that not changing? How is different body fat percentages not changing?
If on average your body fat percentage is literally the same, so if you took the average of all those numbers and it equated to 3, how are you saying that you are in a surplus and then in a slight deficit? At that point, then all of this is all arbitrary and semantics. If we're talking about relative practical advice, I am saying that you just don't want to change your body fat percentage to a noticeable degree. That is my literal practical advice to everyone.
Well, hey, listen, if you're 2% and go up to 4, that you're going to visually notice that. That's a big difference. Those are the examples you gave.
So let's say you go from.
You said very low.
Okay, so now you're going to pick apart this week to week thing. So let's say week 1 you're 3%, week 2 you're 4%, week 3 you're 3% again, week 4 you're 2%. You went from 3 to 2%. You're saying that you're going to notice that.
If in some universe you're that low body fat, yeah, you would.
Oh my god.
I mean,
okay,
pick more.
15 to 16.
Well,
let's say.
I mean, no, for real, seriously.
Like, it's all arbitrary, man.
No, look, and from what you said, okay, because what your entire scenario exists in one set point in time, okay? So if you're at a point where you have a maintenance of 2%, and then it's here, okay, 15, right? 15, 16, then it drops.
All right.
That's all happening.
Let's make this even smaller. Let's say it's 15 to 15.1%, then 14.9%. Is that changing your body fat percentage now over time?
Changing numbers is changing, right? Even if it's
Okay,
very
so you're bulking
small.
for 3 days and then you're not bulking for another 3 days.
Well, the length of time is not relevant. It is what it is.
So if you
you
one
could
gram,
cut for more. You could cut for many months. You could cut for 2 weeks.
if you gain 1 gram of body fat, that's a surplus?
According to you, yeah, and it would be, isn't it?
No, it wouldn't be, because it's not an exact science. Even the literature itself states it's not an exact science, and I said myself it's not an exact science.
But you said earlier anything over TDEE results in body fat. You didn't give an exact amount.
And I also stated at the very beginning when I was discussing what maintenance of body weight actually is that it alters and changes between 3 to 5%.
I mean, maintenance of body fat?
Just body weight. I said body weight.
Right. Well, that's not the same as body fat changing.
We're talking about all variables in your body are going to change some degree. Like you can't exactly eat in a surplus exactly at 250 and gain exactly the amount of body fat you want.
Well, this is the whole reason why. I mean, what did you say earlier? 20 surplus. That's why this is impractical, because there's no way you're ever going to precisely track that much.
Give my practical advice again, because apparently it did not stick. So my practical advice is to literally replace your total daily energy expenditure alongside eating a pre-workout meal to replace what you're doing for exercise. Do not change your body fat percentage significantly. That is all I am arguing.
Okay, you said earlier, which that's fine, I get that. You said earlier, though, anything over TDEE will result in body fat. So even if your body fat is changing so-called insignificant.
But your TDEE changes too on a daily basis.
Yeah, sure it
does.
It's but
completely arbitrary to argue any sort of way that you are gaining a significant degree of body fat from day 1 to day 2 if you gain a gram of body fat. Yeah, sure, you can argue that's a quote-unquote surplus in arbitrary numbers, but that's arbitrary. And TDEE varies from day to day, and it's impossible to exactly track it. However, what is possible to track is a noticeable amount of body fat.
Well, sure, but listen, you said anything over TDEE results in body fat gain. So you will be in a surplus then, based on what you said. It has to happen in some form. Has to, if you're going to build muscle.
Then you can argue that you could be in a surplus and a deficit where you're losing body fat, and one day you gain 1 gram of body fat.
I mean, yeah, sure, for a day. Okay, sure.
So if you lose body fat but you gain 1 gram one day, you're in a surplus?
Well, how else would the body fat get there?
So you don't advocate for TDEE or surplus or a deficit to be any sort of variation, even though it does vary from day to day and it is completely impossible to accurately track it.
No, that's the exact reason why I advocate bulking in the first place. You give yourself a buffer because tracking this precise amount is not feasible to do. So remember, right, to get higher, and even if you want to stick as close to maintenance as possible, you're going to have to keep going up. Slowly.
Or only bulking.
Well, yeah, I mean, realistically, well, that's another thing, though, because your definition of maintenance includes any muscle accrual, right? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well.
So do you argue for only bulking? That's what I'm asking.
No, not in every circumstance. I think I'd say the vast majority of lifters will have to do it at some point.
Why do they need to? Well, what do you mean by the vast majority of lifters have to do it at some point? But if you're gaining muscle and you're arbitrarily gaining a little bit of fat with that, then wouldn't you always be bulking, and there would be no such thing as bulking or cutting because you just be bulking?
Well, no. I mean, it's reasonable to cut it off at a certain point. I mean, the thing about cutting is, okay, so like there's two general cuts you could think of. One is a bodybuilder cut, which is extreme, not totally unhealthy, not warranted. No one should do it, but people still do it. single digit
So,
body fat. Another one would be the general lifter who watches. 1 second, bro. General lifter that
no, it's
watches.
fine. It's fine. I
They get up to 20%, and then I'm getting a little bit too puffy. They overdo it. Then they'll cut back down. They'll still be in the healthy range, but they cut down to where they're more comfortable. Even if all the other.
So that's what I'm asking. Like, why is that necessary? You don't need to do that.
You don't have to get up to that very high point. No, you don't. But you still
No,
have to be.
you don't need to. You don't need to gain a significant amount of body fat to the point where you need to cut. That's literally my argument. So why do you need to?
Yes, but you advocate eating at your TDEE where no body fat's gained, because you said any amount over the TDEE will result in body fat.
Okay, so going back to what you just said, because I asked you a question, let's not dodge it here. If you are gaining a noticeable amount of body fat in a bulk, why is that necessary? And if gaining any sort of body fat at any point in time is a bulk, then gaining muscle, even without bulking, is a bulk in your definition.
Well, I mean, if you want to look at it like that, sure. I mean, we're talking the context of people that weight train.
Okay, so then you're saying that everybody's always bulking.
No.
Okay, then what is a bulk for your definition?
Oh, I mean, I'm going off the one you said. You said it's any, right? Do you surplus equals bulk colloquially? You agree?
No. So what I'm talking about is that if you're eating above your TDEE and you're gaining a noticeable amount of body fat over time, that's a bulk.
No. Okay.
You have to cut at some point because you can't just infinitely gain body fat.
Sure. What parameters meet noticeable? You said
to the point where you need to cut.
Noticeable, or to the point where you need to cut.
Yes.
Well, what point is that? That varies per person. Some people can get up to 20. Some guys are at 20%. They feel fine. They'll be happy there.
So let's go back to the point that I was discussing, because you kept on dodging it, and I'm still trying to wait for a response here. Is if you are always gaining body fat to a noticeable degree, then aren't you always in a bulk? And if that is the case, then
you would be in that case, yeah. If you're always gaining, yeah.
So then you're in a bulk. So then you shouldn't be advocating for a cut at any point. And you should just be advocating for a very, 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 very minimal bulk that you barely notice.
I mean, as close to no fat gain as possible, but it's just not realistic.
How is
that
not realistic that you can't just maintain your body composition throughout the year? I mean, that's pretty reasonable that you can maintain within maybe 3-4% change.
Sure.
Like,
but
bulking and cutting cycles. You don't need to. You can like literally, let's say I'm 15% 1 week, and then a few weeks later I'm 16%, but then I'm back down to 15% after a couple more weeks. Did I just do a bulking and cutting cycle? Not really. It's like so unnoticeable.
Well, I mean, not really, but they're just very short term. I mean, your boyfriend was doing a mini cut, right? Was he doing a mini cut?
Well, because he is a little bit more over fat by the classic definition. He has more body fat percent than he is comfortable with.
Well, how did he get there? What did he do? Why did he do that?
Because he used to be really overweight, and he had with eating. Why are we talking about my boyfriend?
I'm not trying to make this personal. I mean genuinely, I'm using as an example because I saw him post something that he was doing a mini cut. What I'm saying is,
people are over fat need to cut.
Yeah, of course they do. But I'm saying you can cut for 2 weeks. It's still a cut or a deficit, even if it's for a very brief amount of time. It's the same thing.
So if you are hovering between, let's say, 0.1 and 0.5% body fat, and let's just disregard like the exactness of this here, because it's literally impossible to track exactly.
Hey, I mean, you're the one giving really concise little amounts.
No, so. I'm not. So you're the one who's saying that we need to bulk at some point. If all,
in all likelihood,
no matter what significant degree is, go ahead. Sorry.
This has gone in circles for almost an hour and a half at this point. How about both of us, or both you two, make like a final little, like 3 to 5 minute summary of your position, and then you can have like a final remark, on each other's positions, because it seems like this is just going in one circle, and you guys are just kind of both going around each other's points.
There was a point about 5 minutes ago, and you could see it in the chat. She advocates a surplus or a bulk, even if it's very, very small, but she seems to say not to bulk. And listen, I mean, if you can keep it as minuscule as possible and never have to cut, that's great. practically speaking, and also some people, they'll have periods of time where they don't mind gaining some fat, they can go out to eat more, whatever, and they get up to a point, they say, oh, screw it, and then they can cut. I mean, cutting's not that difficult ultimately if you're good with your nutrition and everything, if you get kind of accustomed to it. Losing some percentages of body fat's not terribly difficult. You can do it kind of quickly once you get better at all of this process. So this, it's like, oh, get so fat and then you have to bulk and you're going to do all this other stuff. I mean, you still advocate fundamentally, you advocate bulking very, very, very slowly. But you seem to always just say, oh, don't do it. And then you say it's maintenance and you do all this other stuff. I don't know what the aversion is to just saying bulk really slowly, because that's really what you advocate.
So just to wrap up my side of things, when people say bulk, they primarily are talking about a noticeable surplus where they are gaining body fat. Whether you like it or not, that's the popular belief. And I don't like to feel the popularity, but it just is what it is. When you're talking about a bulk, you're talking about a noticeable surplus. And even in your own argument, when you're saying that at some point you're going to have to bulk, then if we even go by my own definition, you would always be in a slight bulk. Because if you're gaining muscle, you're always in a slight bulk, according to your. However,
Thank you.
However, if we are talking about actual science that works within statistical significance and variation, which does occur in the human body, then if your body fat is changing to a very insignificant degree over time, you are not technically in a noticeable surplus because you're not gaining a noticeable amount of fat over time, which is not a surplus. So at the end of the day, when I'm talking about bulking and cutting is not necessary for optimal muscle growth, it just isn't. There is no evidence to suggest that increasing your body fat percentage is going to increase the amount of muscle that you can gain or the rate of muscle growth. You never have to bulk, is what I'm saying, by the classical definition.
Even though you just said that you should always be like really slowly bulking.
By your own definition. You work in very, very much no variation. I don't really understand it, but even literature literally defines body within a 3 to 5% change. So there is no specific maintenance. There is no one word or one number. So when I say total daily energy expenditure, it's always moving around. So science is there's always a variation. There's never a single point. Your blood work doesn't even work in a single number. It works in a range. Same thing with your total daily energy expenditure. Mm-hmm. So your daily energy expenditure theoretically is a range because your body composition is not
right.
All a non-change in body composition from year to year a bulk. I just wouldn't, because that's not how it actually is defined by you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I asked. You seem to just have okay, you have the really like classic old school idea of bulking, where it's just like, well, like you said, significant fat gain. You mentioned you don't believe any surplus automatically means significant fat gain, though. So I mean, we could go back and forth all day about what is significant. I mean, I think you mentioned to the point that you would have to cut.
Well, you also said that bulking at some point is going to be necessary to improve or activate muscle growth. It's not, based off of what we know. And any issues that would be solved with a quote-unquote caloric surplus could be solved with an alteration to your diet, improving the amount of carbohydrates, improving the amount of protein, things like that. You don't need to bulk. A caloric surplus does not directly mean that you are activating muscle growth. That is not how a caloric surplus functions physiologically.
I mean, like I agree. It doesn't mechanistically just flip on some magic switch.
So then why does it improve it? It doesn't.
Because it's like you just said earlier, you're gonna have to gain. It's inevitable. It's Thanos. You have to be in a surplus of some form over time, whether that's just to even increase the maintenance point, whatever. It has to happen. And you can say that's still maintenance, okay. I mean, you're saying that I'm playing semantics. I really don't think
I'm saying that it's a range because it's literally impossible to calculate the exact number and be exact with it. Because science and how just biomedical science works, we work in ranges, we don't work in single numbers. So when I say total daily energy expenditure, sure, you can play the semantic card and be arbitrary and say that I'm saying that it's a single point in time, so you're always technically bulking, but that is semantic. That is exactly what you're saying that I'm being. I'm just saying to maintain a body composition that you're comfortable with constantly rather than increasing the body fat percentage for no apparent reason that's not improving your rate of muscle growth. Because as I stated, in all of the studies I cited, body fat percentage does not improve the rate of muscle growth. It just doesn't.
I mean, sure, I get that, but listen, we'd have to go through and read all these studies because I'm not going to sit here and say you don't know what you're talking about. But these studies have a lot of variables. There's a lot of holes in them. There's all kinds of. You can't just look at an exercise science study. A lot of these will be 12 people for 6 weeks. You know what I mean? Like it's too limited to just say, oh well, it says that there. You know what I mean?
I mean, you're saying that there's holes in it, but I'm not the one that's appealing to popularity where I'm saying that everybody does bulking, and the teenagers who are given a bulking diet, they improve in their performance. So therefore, it's necessary to gain muscle. Like, I'm not appealing to popularity, I'm appealing to science and evidence.
You appealed to popularity earlier when you said that people consider bulking gaining significant fat, though. You said yourself, I'm appealing to popularity.
Necessary.
Say again?
You're appealing to bulking. You're appearing. Oh my God.
Okay, that was good. I am doing that. You're right.
Popularity. You are literally appealing to popularity by saying that bulking is necessary at some degree for everyone because people have done it to get themselves out of a plateau. That is appealing to popularity.
But you did say a little bit ago, yeah, you're going to have to slowly bulk. You did say
no,
that,
you're
right?
You're actually strawmanning me here. So as I just said, science is not an exact argument. So when you're talking about an actual number, that doesn't really exist when we're talking about anything in medicine, when we're talking about science, physiology, and it even said it in my own study that review that I said 3 to 5% change in body weight maintenance. And that's what body weight.
Okay, I mean, listen, you can say I'm strawmanning. The chat, I know people are recording this. We can watch it back. You said exactly what I said that you said. I don't remember the exact wording, but you did say it.
I didn't say it was an exact number. You're the one who said that it was an exact.
I never said exact number, but you did say you have to bulk in some capacity. That's
no, I said by your definition, you would have to quote unquote bulk continuously, but then you say that you need to bulk as well on top of that. So what is that? A double bulk? It's bulk squared.
It's triple bulk. You get 3 patties and cheese and sauce, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, you just eat burgers all day. That's what I do.
All right, so I think that kind of caps it all up there.
You guys have a good night.
All right, have a good night. That was an interesting argument.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Some of his points I agree with. Some of your points I agree with. I'm kind of just more in the middle. I don't really argue the semantics of like TDEE, like ever. I'm just like, hey, this is your TDEE. It can vary by a little bit. It depends on what you are. We're going to run this for a couple weeks. If you don't see your weight change, we need to change that number.
I'm going to be honest. I wish I clarified that it had to be like an actual variation. I cited that study at the very beginning, but I didn't hammer it home enough. And I feel like that almost convinced him into thinking that it was like a single number.
Yeah. I've been reading the chat the entire time. I don't think they understand. My girlfriend came into the chat, and that's why I was blushing. She's like, the guy with the backwards hat is hot. And I responded to her comment, and they're like, oh, he's blushing. Like, yeah, it's because my fucking girlfriend's in the chat, all right? What am I supposed to do, all right? But yeah, I mean, when it comes to those kinds of things with TDEE, no, bulking is not required to build muscle. It's just not. It's a matter of your protein intake relative to your body weight and your fat-free mass. That's it.
That's literally what I was trying to say. Is like, it's not the surplus that matters. You don't need a surplus.
No.
Like, you don't need to gain so much body fat that you literally need to cut. It's just not necessary. So
yeah, I don't know. It's really hard for people to get rid of the whole cutting versus bulking debate where we have empirical evidence that shows you don't need a bulk in order to maximize hypertrophy. You just don't. Well, if you're assuming that they're training hard enough and that they're getting adequate rest, they're hydrating properly, all the other factors, but you just don't need a bulk to do that.
Yeah.
Not to be on against you or on his side or whatever. I don't know what these people in the comments are on about. They're like, oh, he's taking her side. It's like, no, I just interjected because I heard something that was so incredibly stupid. I felt obligated to correct the mass moves mass statement, because that is not true.
Yeah, no. Thank you for dipping in there, because I was trying to figure out what to say. Like I have, so just like briefly, like I have this thing where I can't think of what to say because I think in pictures.
Yep.
So it's very difficult for me to think things on the fat. Like, oh Jesus Christ, I did that again. I can't like think things on like the fly. So
Yep.
it's really difficult for me to actually do that. It's why I have all these notes here on like different sources.
Oh yeah.
But that's the thing there. Either
Yeah.
way, yeah, appreciate you for coming on, and yeah.
All right.